Assad also doesn't want to see this enclave continue, and Putin's his supporter. But officially there is pressure on Turkey to stop this bombing, to retreat back to their borders. Turkey controls effectively parts of northwestern Syria through its own sort of allies in the rebel movement, and America is saying you should be happy with that.
What is the latest on these attacks?
We have been seeing for the last few days repeated sort of airstrikes on this little Kurdish enclave in northeast Syria that's been effectively independent since not long after the start of the Syrian civil war, and now has the backing of effectively of Britain and America, because we joined in with this Kurdish force in fighting ISIS. The Turks, President Erdogan, really is threatening a ground invasion as well. The problem is that this Kurdish enclave is effectively run by the Syrian branch of the PKK, which is this guerrilla force that's been fighting a war against the Turkish central government for sort of 30 or 40 years now.
And what kind of interventions have been made or might be made?
Well, so it's one of these stories that just sort of keeps rumbling on, because too many people don't want a sort of status quo to become established. So the Kurds are quite happy with this semi-autonomous state. The Americans and the Brits are quite happy, and the other Western allies, with this buffer zone basically being established between Iraq and the regime in Syria. The fly in the ointment is these massive detention camps where ISIS fighters and of course famously the ISIS brides, women, children, others, many of them not ISIS in fact, but people sort of caught up in the war being held. But the Turks and the Syrians and the Russians don't want to see this become a de facto independent state or semi-independent state. So there's a constant stirring of the pot, if you like. Now, Turkey is allegedly being restrained by both Russia and America. They're both putting out messages saying, don't invade, don't sort of, upturn the apple cart. Think about what will happen to all these ISIS prisoners if in the chaos they manage to escape. You're never quite sure how genuine that is from Putin's side. Assad also doesn't want to see this enclave continue, and Putin's his supporter. But officially there is pressure on Turkey to stop this bombing, to retreat back to their borders. Turkey controls effectively parts of northwestern Syria through its own sort of allies in the rebel movement, and America is saying you should be happy with that.
And Richard, of course, the kind of, not the irony here, but the strange thing here is that we spent years, quite rightly, talking about Syria and what was going on there in terms of the regime and in terms of the people who were trying to rise up against the regime. But we don't talk about that particular aspect of Syria anymore. We only really talk about Syria in conjunction with, other countries that it might or might not be supporting. What is happening there? Is the conflict there still going on? Is it stuck?
It's a frozen conflict. I mean, as we've seen, in one way or another, with lots of wars, particularly wars that Russia has been involved in, it doesn't really suit Russia's interest to try and help Assad retake the whole of the country. If you remember, he lost, getting off for half the country, at least in terms of ground territory during the civil war, and managed to regain the most sensitive areas, the areas on the southern border, the suburbs of Damascus, Aleppo, the second city, with Russian support. But there are still these areas, this buffer zone in the northeast, and this rebel-held territory, partly jihadist-controlled in the north and northwest. So it's a dysfunctional state. The state itself, the regime-held area of Syria is pretty dysfunctional. No real economy. Electricity supplies not working. Water facilities damaged. Not really a functioning state. And these two sort of statelets carved out of it in the northwest and northeast. no sign of a resolution at the the diplomatic table. No sign that anyone's going to insert enough military force to reunify the country in one way or another. So that's kind of a frozen conflict in that sense. But as I say, people like Turkey, people like the Assad regime, don't really want it to become a settled state. So it's a frozen conflict with a bit of turbulence, if that's not a mixed metaphor.
Yes.